Hi all, my name's Todd Emma, and I have the pleasure of working with this lovely group of people, which I will introduce. We've been working with the East Tennessee Children's Hospital in Knoxville for about the last 4 years. We've put out several projects that range from PC-based simulation to VR-based simulation. Our current build is the last of a series of de-escalation projects that the hospital asked us to start about 3 years ago. Is it? I could probably talk louder. There we go. So my name is Todd Emma. I am the MFA coordinator at ETSU, East Tennessee State University, as well as a faculty member and the person in charge of the East Tennessee Children's Hospital project. This is Grayson on the end over there. He's the lead producer and 3D modeler. He's been working closely with the group of educators at the East Tennessee Children's Hospital who have gone through and tested and applied this for the last several years. Megan Smith is the lead animator and technical artist. She came on this year as her first year, I believe, on the project. She's a grad student currently and a working artist. She does a lot of freelance work, and she is just finishing up some of her games. She has been roped into the rigger and lead technical artist for the project. And right there is Stephen Overton. He is the lead environment artist and producer. He's been working with the Children's Hospital as the interaction person. This is a little bit about the first project that we did. I'm going to let the video speak for itself, and then I will let it go.
Which door would you open to find the supplies to start an IV?
When it's life or death, every single moment matters.
Anything can change in a second.
When a child has an emergency at East Tennessee Children's Hospital, our nurses are ready.
Well, I think games like this help us be prepared for those changes that we can't always know ahead of time.
The hospital partnered with East Tennessee State University to give nurses a chance to train for that emergency through an interactive video game.
To be able to see it on a computer screen, not just touch it on a page, be able to click, open drawers, pick out boxes, things like that, that really helps.
The Crash Cart interactive learning game walks the nurse through a code blue scenario, a medical emergency. The game simulates gathering supplies from the crash cart to meet the needs of a patient. Students at ETSU's digital media program created the interactive experience for class credit.
The students worked so hard on this project, and to see that come to life, and especially all the collaboration and inter-department work that we had here at the organization to prepare for it. I mean, we had frontline staff, staff educators, and multiple departments. I cannot emphasize enough the collaboration and how positive it was to work with everybody.
Taylor Oglesby with Organizational Development and Learning spearheaded the partnership for the hospital. She says the game uses a training technique nurses asked for.
They really wanted critical thinking, they really wanted hands-on and an interactive experience, specifically for Code Blue training. So we took this to the next level.
She says it creates confidence so staff can handle these Code Blues quickly and effectively.
It doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, you need to be completely prepared. And we're hoping that this game creates that sense of preparedness and confidence with interacting in a crash cart.
That was the first iteration of it. Go ahead and stop that right there. That was the first iteration of the project. What they meant, their idea of Code Blue is something that doesn't happen often and is life and death. So what had happened to inspire this particular thing for them to reach out to us was that a patient's parent had collapsed in the parking deck and they had to rush the crash cart out to save them. And a lot of the staff at the time didn't have up-to-date training on the crash cart. So they needed a way to quickly get people refreshed on the crash cart that was more than the traditional watch a video and do this. So the crash cart that I'll show you here is what it is. Had to go through and be interactive for them. It asked a series of questions. They had to find the item on the crash cart itself and go through, and it would produce the scenarios. So after the first successful scenario, the hospital came back to us and said, we'd like to do something else. They had seen something in Australia where clinical staff had been using VR to work with de-escalation of patients. There was an angry person screaming in the hallway, and they had to figure out how to de-escalate the situation. They came back to us this time with a much broader, bigger scope. We'd gone from a single level, single design, and that single level, single design had been a huge learning curve for us. They came back this time and they wanted something interactive in VR space. So we had to come through and deliver that. And the first version, chapters 1 and 2, are here. Actually, I'm gonna try to, can I break this for just a second?
Welcome to the East Tennessee Children's Hospital de-escalation experience.
Nobody likes a stressful situation, but when we do face one that involves our patient families, it's important we treat them with kindness and confidence.
That gives our employees a lot better understanding of, hey, this is how I handle this, and this is what I'm going to see. So I think that's really good for our employees.
Virtual reality is coming to the Discovery, Innovation, and Simulation Center.
And you put the goggles on, it immerses you into an environment that you can practice CPI, basically, and you can run through some questions and learn in a safe environment how to do that.
Clinical simulation technician Tim Branham says we're using it to make sure our crisis prevention and intervention skills, or CPI, are sharp when they need to be.
VR can give us any instrument. It can give us any machine. It can give us any situation, any scenario.
Scenarios 1 and 2 will be ready for us to train on January 11th in DISC. Our education staff authored each scenario. One of the situations takes you through how to deal with a difficult child or parent. Accreditation and performance analyst for ODL, Taylor Oglesby, says we partnered with the East Tennessee State University Digital Media Program.
It is just as beneficial for the students working on this as it is Children's Hospital. They're gaining real work experience to add to their portfolio.
She says the partnership will continue, so look out for even more VR learning options to help us help kids.
So a little bit so that you can see what it is that we built. We recreated the hospital hallway and patient room. Lots of measurement, lots of exacting standards. We also worked with the staff to get the scripts just right, as we are definitely not the content experts on this field.
And I'm supposed to memorize everyone's name in this hospital? Who are you? That tells me nothing. What are you doing here? I am calm. Who are you to tell me what to do?
After a lot of back and forth with a lot of stakeholders, we nailed down a script that everybody found very much to the point where they were happy with it. A lot of the things that we learned in the early stages were that we needed to be on ground sooner. We needed to get into the hospital as soon as possible. We needed to make sure that the machines that they had worked with the software as soon as possible. We needed to work with IT earlier. We needed to make sure that the hardware that they had was the exact same hardware that we had, and that they had the same permissions, not just the same hardware. With this back and forth between their IT, their stakeholders, their educational department, we were able to successfully create the original crash cart, the scenarios 1 and 2, and today this group of people will be talking about working on scenarios 3 and 4, which are another de-escalation scenario. Following this, we've been tasked with changing from an outside to an inside experience, and we're going to be working with the medical staff starting as soon as we finish 3 and 4 on a tracheotomy process with some of the doctors. So we're going to switch from a very big to a very small and has to be correct VR experience. And that's what our future plans are. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Megan. And she will tell you a little bit about working with animation for VR.
Right, so I will go through the first 2 slides of this because we kind of already determined, you know, what today's talk's about. We determined, you know, all of our people that we got working here. So, as a quick introduction, my name's Megan Smith. Hello. I was the lead animator and technical artist on this project. And a couple things I'm going to be going over today is, one, how did I get here? Serious games versus indie games, importance of referencing your animations, the exporting pipeline, and understanding game animations as a whole. So, a brief introduction for me is I got my bachelor's degree in 2019 in animation and worked on about half a dozen different indie titles in that 2-year gap between starting my master's program this past year. So I decided to take this class, and as Todd says, I kind of got roped into it a little bit, but it's a good time regardless. So to kind of give you more of an understanding, like I said, I worked on a lot of indie games before this, and switching from an indie game mindset to a serious game mindset was very different for me. So just as like a quick example of one of the things that we struggled with was our stakeholders, because our stakeholders were really, really nice people. However, they weren't game developers. They weren't people that knew the pipeline. So they were pretty unfamiliar with how much work goes into a game, and made some what seemed like small requests on their part, but turned into a lot of work for us. So as a quick example, we have a Randy rig over here, and just a very minute difference, spot the difference here. He's got a water bottle in this one, doesn't have a water bottle in this one. That was a decision by our stakeholders about halfway through production that the Randy character needed to have a water bottle. It was very important to his character arc. So basically what that turned into for me was I had to go through and completely re-rig Randy. That way he could have the water bottle in his hand and you could turn it on and off. That way all of our animators are also doing their animations with the water bottle in the exact same spot. That way it transitions better in between. I also had to update the entire shot list that we had of all the animations that we needed to now have the updated list of which animations need it and which ones don't need the water bottle. Let's see, I'm so sorry. And then I also had to go through and re-export all of our older animations. And so essentially it was a lot of work for a very small, minute request. However, in my experience so far in indie games, most of the indie games are run by gamers, people that make games, people that know what goes into it, know how much work goes into it. And overall, my experience has been they're very laid back and open to creative ideas, such as I've had on more than one occasion where the indie developers ask, hey, I need this idle animation. Do that. That could be anything. That could be he falls on the floor. That could be he's twiddling his thumbs. That could be the typical like up and down bobbing motion. It could be anything. But they were very trusting and open to my creative input, and were open to just whatever I wanted to do. So it's a different world working for stakeholders versus indie games, in my opinions. So my responsibilities on this team was I was the lead animator, and I had 4 very talented animators working with me. But most of those animators were primarily for games. They came from more of a film background. So one of the things that we needed to do was referencing our rig. Because, like I mentioned with the water bottle, this rig was going to have a lot of updates. Things were going to change. Things were going to be different. So every time that we had to update him, we had to make sure our file was referenced. That way our animations now move on to the new character. What that means is if you don't reference your character, that means all of your animations are now stuck on that old character, and Randy is going to be very thirsty. Like, he's not going to have that water bottle, and you should reference your rig. Just reference your rig. And if you take anything away from this, like really, reference your rig. So another thing that was really nice for our animators to learn was exporting. So our animators were very excited to learn that we weren't going to be rendering. Nobody likes rendering. But we had to learn an entirely new process that was very new to some for exporting game animations. So for those of you who don't know, when you're exporting game animations, in most cases, you won't actually be exporting this entire character and all of the things he's holding, all of his skin, clothes, shoes, all that. We actually won't be exporting any of that. Instead, we bake that animation onto his skeleton, and we export this little yellow fella over here. So that way it doesn't bog down the game and make it super heavy. And that was a big learning curve for some, which turned into me making a lot of tutorial videos to keep our team on track with everything that we needed to do. And for those who maybe don't come from like a game dev background, one, why are you at ECGC? But the way I like to explain it is essentially when you're exporting game animations, you aren't exporting the puppet, you're exporting the strings to the puppet. It's still gonna make the puppet move, but you're not having to keep track of every single vertex and every single face on the character to understand where they're moving to. So another challenge that my team ran into was game animation as a whole. So coming from a film background, most animators, and we're all guilty of this, if the character is doing just a camera shot, maybe it's just like the chest up, we're not gonna animate the shoes, we're not gonna animate the feet, we're not gonna animate the knees, those are never gonna move. You'll never know, but they're never gonna move. So one of the challenges that we ran into was making sure that all of our animations were good from all angles. So what that means is your animation could look like this from the front and you've spent many, many hours on it, but you never turned your camera. And so he looks like this from the side. We gotta make sure that we're looking good from all angles because we're not the player. We don't know what angle the player is gonna be viewing that character from. They have full control over that. But in all actuality though, reference your rigs first, but getting to be the lead on this position was a very eye-opening experience. I'm beyond thankful for such a hardworking team that I had of animators who were willing to overcome any obstacle and learn any new technique, and most importantly, put up with me for a whole semester. That takes a skill in itself. But so with that, I'm gonna do my little closing statements. I also have business cards if you guys want them. I collect them like Pokemon cards. You guys should too. It's a very fun hobby. So with that, I think I'm going to just pass it off to Mr. Steven.
Said, I'm Stephen Overton, and I serve as the producer, lead level designer, and sound designer for the current ETSU production project. Was it all? Closer? Okay. There we go. Technical issues figuring them out. So I'm going to be talking about more of the evolution of the Children's Hospital projects from that first one you saw with the crash cart simulation to the more current one we're working on. And the points I'm going to discuss is developing an internal pipeline for a production team, adding in external clients to that pipeline issues and solutions that we had to overcome, unique challenges that I took away, as well as my team took away for VR development, and key takeaways for VR development for serious gaming. Now, before I go into those points, let me introduce a little bit more about myself. So initially when I started on this project, it was about 2020, and I've been serving on it ever since till now. And currently I'm a 3D artist in my first year of grad school, finishing it up right now. And I currently specialize in 3D modeling. So moving on. So design to pipeline process. Is it still fine? Let's go. So as in my intro, I mentioned that I served on the initial project, starting off. Since then, we had to create a pipeline that's been ever evolving and changing continuously. That was made with changes both from the internal side and the external side. So initially, when we started out, we developed a small development team that consisted of an art lead, a scripting lead, producer, and lead producer. And with this kind of leadership established, we got our starting pipeline where we can actually start working on our production. So, next thing we kind of tackled when we first started was how we were going to handle in-house source control of the project. So we started using GitHub for that. We had to start training our team on how to actually properly use GitHub, make sure no one was confused by the process, make sure no one overlapped work with one another. That. Let's see here. Some challenges from that original one. We never accounted for, at least when we first started production, on time for doing a level grade out from the beginning. We were kind of working on that as we were going through the production, which we changed as we went later on. Let's see. Yep. And with that setback, we still were able to deliver that initial project on time to the projects, to the project managers, and to our clients' expectations, and we actually exceeded those expectations. And to what Todd said earlier, that led us to working on another project, not project, but another production experience with them, being that simulation experience. So, with that initial goal, so the initial goal of the VR de-escalation experience was to train the Children's Hospital staff on handling difficult situations they may encounter on a day-to-day basis. And this in turn led to more extensive scope for the project compared to the first one we had. And by that extent, we had to expand that pipeline we started with to make it where it actually fit that production. For example, we had to change how we handled pre-production. So as I said, we didn't initially have things like a gray out started off before we started production, naming conventions, things of that nature. So before we started production this time around from the beginning, it took about a month or so to do pre-production work where we can tackle those issues, getting such as naming conventions set up, getting gray out set up, things like that, so that way we could relieve stress on our team as we went through the project. And the second thing we did is that we initially had communication where we had weekly meetings on the first production, which they worked fine for what we needed, but since it was getting bigger and bigger, it was hard to keep track and make sure everyone was doing what they needed to do on time and everything. So we integrated using Discord as a communication feature between the team, so that way not only the producers, but the leads and such could keep a track on their team members at any given point to make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing. And within those two improvements, say it led to us making a production experience that was at least twice as large, if not larger than that, than the first one within the same time frame. Now, another challenge we had to overcome to that was adding our our external clients to our internal pipeline. So when we started collaborating, similar to what Megan said as well, our clients didn't have any previous knowledge of game design. That kind of served as us not only being their production team, but also as like educators to them to kind of inform them about the pipeline process, how game design worked from the start to the end. And that was a interesting discipline, to say the least. So first we had to teach our clients on game development, like I said, mattered, seeking so that they know what kind of end product they'd be expecting from us, from the input they gave to us. And we first started teaching them off by having them included into our production meetings, so that way they weren't just having meetings with the producers and the project manager, so they could see how we communicate with one another, how we talked. Then we started doing things like having them learn our terminology, so that way they can understand what we were talking about, so when we get feedback from them, they knew what we were saying, and vice versa, they would know, and we would know what they would be saying to us. Again, so that way we can make the simulation better fit what they needed from us. Let's see here. Another thing that we had to kind of teach them, which was something that at least my team struggled with when we were doing fit initially, was teaching the client to differentiate a game-breaking issue and a non-game breaking issue. Because initially we would get feedback on things like text wasn't looking right, or text was misspelled, or graphics weren't looking right. When in turn we were really wanting to see development, it's like, is the interaction not working right? Is the gameplay not going to how you want? And we had to inform them the difference between those things. Let's see here. Second, I had to teach the clients what kind of hardware they would need, so like what Todd mentioned earlier. We had to get them upgraded, get them introduced to new hardware, because initially their their training simulation equipment was not even able to run Unreal Engine-based games. So we had to start from that, getting it ready to develop for that. And on top of that, we had to get them used to have accepted would actually run VR titles because that was the next direction we were going to work on with them. Let's see here. Last thing that we noticed is that we forgot to add what we would call an invisible stakeholder to that list of stakeholders, being the IT department at Children's. And once we added that group in, it became a lot easier to communicate between us and the main class, and being able to get all the equipment set up and things from that nature. Let's see here. Yep. Let's go ahead and switch over. So some issues and solutions we ran into. So during my time on both the crash cart and the VR de-escalation experiences, there's been issues that's cropped up within our internal pipeline that me or myself or my team didn't maybe even thought about before we even started developing. But the key point on that I want to say is that even though we ran into those issues, we still overcame those issues because we had to, first and foremost, deliver an executable to our client, regardless of what came over it. And let's see. So one such issue that we had to overcome initially was how we delivered our executable. So on the first project you saw with the crash cart, we gave the we gave the clients a physical media at the end of the project, and that's how they got their first project given to them. But when we started working on the VR escalation experience for scenarios 1, 2, and now for 4, with the help of IT, we've got an internal pipeline where we send them files directly to their servers for them to work with. But the problem with that is that we didn't put files in a way that would make it less confusing for them on their end to open and work with. So one thing we came to overcome with that is that we made where we have an installer for them. So we take the files and directly make it to where they would get an installer and they would set up the project on their own, with no confusion or having to dig through files. That way it made it seamless from our team to their team without any issues. Let's see here. Another issue, similar to what Megan was talking about earlier, was introducing character animations into the VR experience. So on that crash car simulation, we didn't have any characters in the scene. That was mostly just the car and the experience itself. And on the second project and the current one, we have characters yelling at the character interacting with them, things like that. So we had to work character animators into our pipeline, and similar to what she said, most of our animators are more geared toward film animation instead of game animation, so I had to get them experienced into that. Let's see here. So the issue we ran into is that, like I said, they weren't used to doing that. So let's see here. Let's go ahead and transition a little over. So some challenges that our VR gave for at least training simulations. So when I began working for VR, I was used to only creating things for desktop play. So I wasn't aware, at least myself, of some of the unique challenges that come with working in VR, at least for the 3D art side of things. So, example, it's a little harder to hide things within your level in VR than it is in traditional games, because the one thing is that your player can look around freely within a level. You can't lock to where they can and cannot look or cannot go as easily. So it kind of comes as an unexpected situations while they're playing. So as an example, the current one we're working on right now has a long stretch of road where the player can look around and see, and that kind of breaks the experience for them that they're within a world that looks exactly like theirs. So a way to overcome this, we use prop modeling techniques where we would hide different parts of the levels, that way they wouldn't be able to see it. Also restricting their movement a little bit more, so that way they wouldn't be able to see outside that little area. Another thing, at least on my end, I encountered during VR that I hadn't really during PC development was specific frame rate issues. Because with VR, if you get too low of a frame rate, you run the risk of having your player have motion sickness issues, being nausea, dizziness, etc. from there. So something I had to keep in mind as a developer on that was making sure that my team's assets and such, when they get into the level, that they would not bog down the frame rate, and that we would keep to about a 90 FPS, so that way our player wouldn't get sick or dizzy while they were playing the game. Let's see here. Yep, and those are just a few challenges, but something I would suggest, at least if you're going to do VR development, is run regular tests in your level to make sure things were running as intended, so that way you don't encounter those little issues. And I'm gonna get to wrap up real quick. So when you start on production of any kind, I would say immediately begin establishing an internal pipeline that includes both your internal team members and your external. Don't just have it work for one or the other, because if you have it work for both, it'll make the production run smoother. You'll be able to have a developed pipeline that can be evolved from. It'll also help you build more of a stable relationship with your client. Second, you're going to run into issues during development, as I'm sure everyone can attest to in here who's done development. However, something at least to me that's more important is how you overcome those issues rather than what they are. Because as I said at the end of the day, you're trying to develop a game that is going to meet your client's expectations one way or the other, and that should be your main goal. And lastly, is the bigger thing. If you're planning to develop a VR-based title, keep in mind both the pros and the cons that come with VR. Because something you really need to ask yourself as a developer, if you're going to work with VR, will VR either help or hinder my game's concept? And if it isn't going to hinder it, what unique challenges will it bring to my level if I decide to implement it into it? With that said, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague here and lead level, not lead level, but I'm lead producer for the project, Grayson Wiles.
Let me pull up my notes so I don't forget anything here. Hello everyone, my name is Grayson Wiles. I am the lead producer and character artist for this project. I've been working with this project since last year around Christmas time, 2 years ago, dear God. I was approached initially by the department's head and asked to be a character artist. And that was roughly around the time I decided that that is something that I wanted to kind of pursue. And I said, sure, that sounds great. Not a bad decision, not a great decision. It definitely put me where I am now. It also was a little too early for me to commit to something like being a character artist. I've been working with Todd for a long time, 4 years I think we've been working together. He approached me last fall after confirming that I had a graduate assistantship position. And he said to me, you and Steven are going to be working together on the East Tennessee Children's Hospital project. And I said, cool, sounds great. And then the semester before, we had a meeting with the person that was going to lead it. His name was Marty Henley, but he took a sabbatical. So I emailed him, and I didn't know he took a sabbatical yet. I emailed him, I said, hey, do you have any sort of communication set up for this project? And he said, oh, I'm not working on that project. News to me. So I messaged Todd, he said, oh yeah, you're in charge. It's like, I barely trust myself to turn in a discussion post on time. So, from that point on, me and Steven took on kind of a co-producer role for that fall, and I took on a more prominent leadership position while he took on a more technical troubleshooting position this semester. But enough intro. Some things I'm going to cover today. I'm going to talk about a little more interpersonal, being a bridge for collaboration. Talk about being a new leader, what that kind of entailed this semester. Early project development, since I, out of the three of us, was the only one to work on scenarios 1 and 2. An overview for those two, and then what it really means to work in virtual reality. So I'll start with being a new leader, I believe. So I was gonna send this email to Todd. I was checking my email to see this. It was in my drafts. In essence, it says, hey, I can't do this. It says, I have 4 weeks of studying anatomy. I'm super grateful for the opportunity. I am sweating bullets here. It was in my drafts and I never sent it, so he never knew. Just so we're all kind of caught up on our East Tennessee Children's Hospital collaboration lore, I guess. I was totally ill-prepared for kind of the early stages of being a producer. Part of my job and Steven's job was managing scope and scale. They love them to death. They have a lot of great ideas. They have a lot of ideas that don't actually involve what it takes to implement that with our production. Perfect example, very recent, very topical. They let me know the other week. They said, we would love to have narration for the last 2 scenarios. I know you only have 5 weeks left, but we would love to have that. We would love to give you that. However, that is not something we can reasonably get into the level in these last 5 weeks. But we would love to do that. And they said, okay, we've established a great rapport with the East Tennessee Children's Hospital. We do our absolute best to implement what they want, but they also trust us to be honest with them about what is an achievable goal for the project and what isn't. Let's see what's next. Everyone's talked about a pipeline. This was our pipeline last semester. So on the right, our little boy character that you saw in their initial video of scenarios 1 and 2 was named Johnny. And with the pipeline last semester, I would like to say nicely that it was not organized. So all of these files, you know, classic finished underscore done underscore UV1 underscore textures done underscore please work underscore V4. So that's what we were working with last semester. I say we as if I didn't do it. Learning the pipeline is definitely something I implemented into my leading style this semester. Making sure that everything was neat and organized. There were folders for everything. Everyone knew where to find something. File directories were easy to follow. Megan had a big part in that for naming conventions in animation. And me and Steven had to develop a naming convention for this semester as well, since they had a rough one, but we needed to write it out for that. So this semester was a lot of learning organizational skills and implementing that into the pipeline in the future. I will get to that soon. I didn't forget anything, go me. Cool. So every project has the thing. The thing that is what's going to break the project today? What's going to catch the project on fire today? So, love him to death. Don't believe he's here. Our extremely brave coder. His name is Caleb Waldrop. Last semester, Todd said, "Hey Caleb, I need you to make a system for me." He said, "All right." And that's that. He gave him the semester to make our whole system. And in its simplest terms, the system works. You pick a question. If it's right, it can branch to another question. If you get it wrong, it increments a variable called a rate meter, and it turns the ambient noise up, and the level gets louder. So it's more distracting for the learner, which makes the level harder. So it incentivizes reading the question, getting it correct, showing that your choices have consequences. And they came back to us and they said, yeah, the learners thought the noise was really distracting. We love it. We like that a lot. They got really distracted, and that's exactly what we want. They did ask us to turn it down because it was really loud. It was beeping like hellishly loud in people's ears. But when I asked Caleb for kind of a lowdown on his system, he said, and I wanted to write this down to quote it, "I wish I could explain how it works, but that would take 3 to 4 hours, and some of it just breaks, and I'm not exactly sure why." Because he is correct. We went in, and there would be some blueprints, and the only annotation would be, "Don't delete this, it breaks the level." Which, I mean, come on, that is, I mean, I laughed every time we saw one of those. But at the same time, I was like, oh God, there's another something, please. And it works. It is held together tightly with Elmer's glue and popsicle sticks, but our 2 lovely coders, Alex in the back right now, and Seth is not here today. They got the system to work with scenarios 3 and 4, and honestly, everyone who worked on that code deserves a Nobel Prize, in my opinion, because that is something that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But I wanted to kind of get into the specifics about VR. I know everyone's kind of touched on it. So everyone's talked about how VR makes it harder. VR is difficult for the project. VR, it can cause issues. It makes the pipeline difficult. So, like, is it even important? Like, why do we even do it? Why do we even have VR in our pipeline in the first place? And, I mean, I thought the same thing for a long time until we saw the results that Taylor Oglesby sent us from the early player testing they did. And, like, honestly, the results do just speak for themselves. So before, the people at the hospital had done a de-escalation simulation. These are the graphs. A little easier to kind of read. Excuse me. The ones on your left, those are the ones before people did the simulation. They were not. The people who did it just were not super confident. A large portion of the people doing the simulations they didn't seem confident they could handle the situation if something did seem to escalate. 50% of them felt that they could handle it. They felt fairly confident in their abilities. After the simulation, 62% of people felt confident, and 37% of the people felt totally confident. No one fell under fairly confident after they did the tests with the same group of 16 people. And honestly, this is when the project felt real to me, was when it's like, oh wow, this like really works. And it works because we are designing a system to where people's choices matter. In the crash cart, stuff like that, it's like almost like a visual quiz. 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, no matter what kind of answer you pick. But with our system, it branches. So you could pick an answer, and if it's correct, it'll take you to question 4. And if it's wrong, it'll take you to question 3, where the parent is more upset, or where they're less upset, and they're more eager to interact with you, just because you chose the right answer at the right time. Allowing people's choices to have impacts on what happens in the world is the biggest draw of virtual reality. It really allows people to feel like what they're doing matters, and it really ingrains in their brain like what is happening around them. A statistic I found, the Society for Human Research Management says that they found a 50% proficiency increase with VR training. And it's roughly the hospital found the same results. So like Stephen said earlier, it depends on the scope, scale, and relevance to your project. But if it is something with training, if it's something that you want people to really learn, I think like undoubtedly VR kind of like takes the cake. VR allows people to live it and learn it instead of being quizzed on it and having to like study for it, which I think is just monumentally exciting, considering that we are moving forward with them on future projects that do involve virtual reality and allow people to learn more efficiently. Just my finishing thoughts, as kind of a first-time leader, like it's okay not to know how to do things. There were plenty of things that while I was leading, in a meeting, I would say, Megan, how go the animations? I don't know. I'm a modeler by trade. I don't know the know-how behind the animations. I wouldn't have allowed the people on the team if I didn't feel like they knew what they were doing and I couldn't trust them with the jobs that I assigned them. Me and Steven approached our leading style in a more passive way. We weren't kind of like helicopter over people, and it worked really well for us. It won't work well for every team, but it worked really well for us, telling people what they needed to do and trusting that they will do it. And it really paid off. Everyone got their work done. Everyone was on time about it. Everyone was quick about it. And I can't thank our team enough for being so proactive in the work they did. Please find more than one coder. I'm begging you, please find more than one coder. VR development makes development interesting, but VR training VR training simulations are effective, and it builds confidence in learners that a normal quiz, a normal study session just can't do as efficiently as VR can. So here's the team. I believe this is almost everyone, if we're not missing one or two people. If you see the person in the middle wearing a gray hoodie facing the wall, that's our other coder. So that's how he's feeling. Thank you everyone for coming. I did not expect so many people to show up. Thank you.
So all in all, what I'd really like you all to take away is VR is not new, but every single time that we have approached it, it has presented us with new problems. We're currently coming off of the 4.26 build that we've been working on for the last 2 years, and we're switching over to 5.0, which is going to create new problems. We don't know who they are. We don't know who the exact team will be. We don't know what will happen, but we do know that it'll be interesting and that we will have to work continuously with our stakeholders, much more so than you would on an indie game. Now, I want to reiterate that we are in Johnson City, Tennessee, at East Tennessee State University, and the Children's Hospital is in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is about 100 miles apart. So at no point were we together for the last 2 years. We have been doing this completely remotely, and we have been relying heavily on inventive new ways in order to get the product across that 100-mile range. We have developed entirely new pipelines, and what really made this possible was the stakeholders' willingness to trust us and to work with us, and the way that we did that was we promised things that we could deliver for the first project. For the first project, we had a first meeting and we had a last meeting, and that was a horrible, horrible, horrible idea. Never do that. For the second project, we had quarterly meetings, and that worked better. For this project that we've been working on this semester, we're having bi-weekly meetings with the stakeholders. Every other Monday night, they lead a group, and there is a discussion through Zoom or Discord, depending on, and then every other week, we have a full group with our entire group where we meet, and then I meet with all the leads on Tuesday night following that. It is so important when you're working with an external group to meet more often than you think you need to, especially when you're working remotely. VR is much more established and easy to work with than AR. However, it is still not 100% baked like PC is. Double your production time, double your meetings for information, and hope your pipeline works. all in all, it was a great thing. I would love to take questions and have you guys pick these people's brains on technical things. Yes, sir.
Megan was talking about there was an animation and a model was added. I'm a professional project manager director, so I'm way up there. I'm that person who's going to come to you and ask you, hey, put some nicer shoes on there. How did you handle just change management? Because that adds time to your timeline and it adds cost or whatever is associated with it. Did you set up sort of a board with stakeholders to say, with this change, this is going to be X, or the impacts are going to be X, Y, and Z? Is there anything established with that, and how would that impact the timeline?
So the question you asked, in case you couldn't hear, was asking how did we basically handle a timeline of having an updated rig and updated changes that weren't originally implemented until about halfway through production. So I would say we handled it in, I made time to make sure that we had time to change things, because I am more of a character animator by trade and not technical artist, so I knew there was going to be changes involved, such as skidding, updates to it that may not work in engine, things that are going to break once it gets into engine. And I set aside time to make sure if they make changes or if things break heavily, we're not going to be underwater at that point. So, like Todd was saying, double the time that you have planned. For this rig in particular, I sent it out, I think at the very beginning of the semester, and was still making changes to it, I think by like mid-March at that point, even though there were already animations on it. Like I was mentioning earlier, reference your files. That's the biggest thing that helped us and saved us. Is anytime I went through and updated all of the rigs to have new features, the animators weren't postponed any at all. They can still work on the old file until there's a new file. Then they get the new file, all their animations still work and are automatically updated onto the new file. So then they really didn't have much of a time crunch at all. It was more of my time management personally. Yes.
You mentioned at one point you had to explain a showstopper and other facets of that. Did you have a formal QA and quality control process and being dedicated to that? Or was this just more ad hoc?
We definitely had a process. The process was developed over the 3 projects. So the first project was a bit of a kludge. We learned how to work remotely like that, and we had to spend a lot of time teaching the clients, as they were just not gamers, they weren't indie developers, they weren't game developers, they weren't savvy in nonlinear storytelling. They just did not understand the process. And we spent a lot of time just explaining what we could and couldn't do with a game engine. The first thing that they gave us that they wanted us to do was pretty much a PowerPoint inside of an Unreal Engine. And it was like, well, we could do that. But we developed a storyboarding process early in our pipeline that really helped us to show the client, because we really needed to be able to show them what to do. And then after that, the first time we got feedback, we would get things like, this spelling is wrong. And we're like, this is ipsilipsum kind of thing. This isn't even words, it's Greek. And they're like, but it's spelled wrong. And we're like, okay, but can you play it? And then by the second iteration, they had gotten a little bit more savvy in the difference. That doesn't mean that they didn't still say the spelling's wrong. And we're like, it's Greek, and it's spelled wrong. But at this point, we've gotten to the point where we do a pre-beta, an alpha, and we give it to them as soon as we can. We do a semester of storyboarding and script writing. So 16 weeks of nothing but back and forth weekly with the team about what the project's gonna look like, and then what the characters are gonna say. And you wouldn't believe, you get 16 doctors working on something, and they get real particular about the difference between is and is. And you're like, I don't understand the difference. And they're like, we don't care. Make it the right is. And we're like, okay. So we have the first set of beta testing, alpha testing, getting all that kind of stuff at the storyboard level. Is this camera angle okay? And we have to be very specific in the questions that we ask, because we can't just ask, do you like this? Because their answer is always, we love it. And then 2 weeks later, it's always, can we change? So we have to be very specific. We ask, is the camera angle okay? Is this language okay? Can we change this item? Are these buttons located in a place that is acceptable? And then we do the alpha, and the alpha is pretty much just the interface with the character in a grayed out room, and then we have to ask those exact same questions again. And then that process continues on through alpha, beta, 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 and then final. But even at this point, they're still sending us spelling errors on things that were checked 2 years ago. And we're like, you signed off on that. Thank you very much. We appreciate your input. As soon as you give us enough time to actually go back and finish that and stop asking for new product, we will open that back up and fix that. So yes, it's a bit of a kludge. Yes, it happens a lot, but yes, there is some formal things in there. But one of the most important parts of that is that storyboarding and script writing that happens in the beginning so that you don't have to do anything bigger than a water bottle later. So, yes. Yes, sir.
You said there was a learning process with trying to teach the people that work in the hospital with games and how to deal with them. Was there a learning curve with y'all trying to learn how to, what goes into making, or what goes into using the crash cart for the simulation little job here?
God, yes. Stephen, you want to talk about learning the stuff in the crash cart?
So just to repeat the question, you were asking more or less just the learning experience of the user. So yeah, the crash cart, that was something else with them. They were still, like he said, unaware of games, so they were kind of unsure of how to do a point and click kind of game to begin with. So it was more trying to tell them, like, without directly telling them, so in user experience, like buttons, UI, trying to tell them, like, can you do this without us telling you how to do this? And that was kind of when crews were like, well, why don't you just tell us? And we're like, we got to make sure this can work without you having us there to, like, walk you through each step. So that was kind of the first learning experience. And then later on, as we went from each production to the current one now, that's become almost non-existent. They never really, from my knowledge, ask us for any help on how to set things up or how to play them anymore. They just do it and they give us feedback usually. Relatively quick-ish. But yeah.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming out. Oh, I have one thing. Yes.
I'm going to do a follow-up on you said something that was interesting. So is your pipeline approach or your production approach, is it straight waterfall, or are you trying to do sprint all the time, agile approach, where you're getting that, taking that by feedback and actually doing it?
We had hoped for a straight waterfall, and I do emphasize hoped. This semester, we found out that our state machine doesn't actually work, and we've been regrouping for that in order to create a deliverable for scenes 3 and 4. We managed to get the crash cart to work, which didn't use a state machine. We used scenarios 1 and 2 were delivered, which did use a pseudo state machine, but scenarios 3 and 4, we had some problems because the character for scenes 1 and 2 stayed relatively in the same position. In 3 and 4, the character walks across space. That broke our state machine. It just broke everything. And we had to work with ETCH, or excuse me, East Tennessee Children's Hospital, to figure out a solution to that. The short-term solution was, we're gonna rewrite everything, we're gonna have the character stand still for a few weeks until we can get this worked out next year. That created a giant sprint. Generally, we knew at the beginning of the semester where each police was. I work with the leads in December to span out the entire 6-month period from December to June. It is relatively baked in that we have a sprint around this time of year, but it shouldn't be a huge sprint. There shouldn't be any 100-hour weeks, there do end up being a few 60-hour weeks, but there shouldn't be any 100-hour weeks. That being said, we are always prepared for a 100-hour week. So, again, thank you to the great team. Thank you all for coming out and listening to us. Please feel free to stop by the booth and ask these lovely people any technical questions. They're here. Thank you.